Now then, not all the battles that we fight on this programme are then lost. One significant and, I think, welcome U-turn by the government announced today means that ticket offices on railway stations around the UK will no longer be closed. This follows a campaign led by the rail union leader Mick Lynch. The government's consultation attracted 750,000 responses, 99% of which were objections. Gareth Dennis is a railway engineer and writer and can tell us more about what this means for the industry and its users. Gareth, good to see you there. What, to remind people, was the biggest argument against the closure of these ticket offices?
Yeah, I think the strongest argument was actually accessibility, and the fact that we have an incredibly, firstly, inaccessible railway system. Decades of underinvestment in the accessibility of the system. Despite the Equality Act and the DRA before it. So an inaccessible railway. So the impact on wheelchair users, blind people, but also, of course, our complex ticketing system. So not just inaccessibility for disabled people, for example, but also inaccessibility for anyone trying to use our incredibly complicated ticketing system and making kind of light of that. Tourists, a good example is Barnstable Station. My grandparents are down that neck of the woods. 50% of their income, 50% of the tickets, the riders coming through that station had bought tickets at the station. So that's, we know Barnstable, that's a tourist area. That's a lot of tickets to lose from that station, for example.
And it's a bit of a pushback against the world where you need to have a smartphone to access anything, isn't it? So it's slightly back to a physical world.
Yeah, to an extent. I think the argument isn't necessarily, certainly from the unions, wasn't necessarily that it's not a good idea for us to continue to kind of, as ticketing becomes more straightforward, it becomes more simple, as the population becomes more comfortable, the higher percentages using smartphones, it's reasonable that we're going to see the rail industry adapt. That's not what these proposals were about, though. These proposals were made from government. It's very important to emphasise this was not coming from the train industry, the rail industry itself. This came from government to cut costs. This was come from straight from the top of Treasury to cut costs in the rail industry as a result of this kind of about face on whether rail is a good idea or not currently in government.
And let's talk briefly about why, because the rail unions, all of the rail unions, I mentioned Mick Lynch, but all of them were involved in the campaign against this. But was this an example of having a public consultation and getting an overwhelming response you didn't perhaps expect?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So firstly, our railway system is pretty undemocratic at the moment. It's very complicated. It's pretty, I wouldn't say fragmented, I'd say atomized. And it's quite difficult for people to feel like they have any control over it. People who are stuck on crowded trains or, cancelled trains, they don't feel like they have much control. This is an example of massive action of people being able to get involved and see a positive outcome with their rail industry. Yeah. I think it's not irrelevant to point to the fact that overwhelmingly the British public want to have a railway system they feel they have control over. I'm not going to use the N word, the nationalisation word, but I think there is a general feeling that the public want more control of their railways. I think this is a good example of nearly 1 million people getting involved. Yeah. It's pretty impressive example of direct democracy.
Pretty impressive. Entirely natural and a thoroughly good news story. Thank you very much indeed for sharing it with us. Thanks so much.